Welcome back to the CyberVault. I'm thrilled to have Channi Greenwall here with me today. Channi is the founder and CEO of Olympix and a leading voice in developer-first Web3 security. With a fantastic background in security engineering, she's building the only toolset that gives developers the power to secure their smart contracts from day one. Channi, a pleasure to have you here with me today. Thank you for joining. Why don't you maybe kickstart and give us a little bit more of an introduction to yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Channi, founder and CEO of Olympix, as mentioned. I'd say TLDR on my background is a traditional technical background. So I have an engineering background. I've been in cybersecurity for about 7 years now. I very quickly realized it's more fun to break than to build, which led me down that path. Started Olympix just about 3 years ago. Prior to that, I worked as a security engineer, as a product lead at a security company. So kind of different roles within the security space, and started Olympix because I personally deployed a project on chain, realized how large the attack surface was, thought it was really interesting. Just kind of wanted to nerd out and see what people were building in terms of security to address this. And the more I looked, the more I researched, the more I realized that the current systems in place were broken. There wasn't actually any novel tech helping move the space forward. And I figured, why not build it? Started Olympix kind of on that premise with kind of the notion, can we build security tools that help developers automate things that historically have been done manually, have been outsourced, and have been broken, meaning not foolproof, often have holes, gaps in coverage. Turns out the answer is yes. Our free tool has about 30% of developers utilizing it today. We have a paid tool with, big marquee customers like Circle, Li-Fi, a bunch of, big names in the space. So really moving forward and helping move the industry forward in terms of security best practices and, more importantly, owning security internally, which is very important to me.
No, awesome. And thank you for the intro. And honestly, like I say, it's so exciting to have you here today because I think we're going to cover something that, in my opinion, is super interesting because really we're going to discuss kind of attack vectors that maybe people aren't ready for or don't necessarily know that are out there. And you guys are, you're solving a problem that I think, again, isn't necessarily the most talked about, but actually is pretty crucial. So I suppose to start off with, what's fundamentally different about the threat vectors and the threat landscape in 2025 compared to what we've been preparing for?
Yeah, okay. So I think it's first important for me to kind of make clear the differentiation between the Web 2 and Web 3 attack surface. So what I'm referring to is smart contracts. So anything being deployed on chain, which by this premise, I'm assuming that in the next 5 to 10 years, every major organization will be deploying on chain. So let's talk about the on-chain security component. So what does the Web3 crypto attack surface look like versus the Web 2? So I think there are three kind of things to hone in on. The first is the immutable nature of code. So in Web 2, we're so accustomed to patch, redeploy. We're consistently pushing out code. And we have that luxury. You have a little feature request, you can push it in a second. There aren't many risks to having holes in that. Whereas in the Web3 ecosystem, every single piece of code that's pushed undergoes rigorous testing and auditing. The second piece is the transparent nature. So again, in the Web2 ecosystem, what we're traditionally accustomed to, we have the luxury of a firewall. We have so many protections in place. In the Web3 ecosystem on chain, everything's can be deduced at a byte or source code level. So you don't have those pieces of protection. So it's even more crucial and critical that there aren't holes in the way that your code is written and in general in your tech stack. And the third piece is direct access liquidity. So again, going back to the Web2 ecosystem, you get exploited, very unfortunate, data is leaked, regulatory comes down, reputational risk to the company who undergoes that. There's definitely repercussions and they're definitely severe. However, they don't even begin to compare to what happens in the crypto Web3 ecosystem. What happens here is if you undergo an exploit, money is directly drained. So let's say a protocol has 12 million, in a second it can be gone. So the entire company goes under. And more importantly, that's not necessarily the company's money, it's customers' money, it's institutional money, it's consumer money, right? So it really deteriorates at the entire ecosystem and makes it harder for this premise that I'm kind of echoing of everything will be on chain in the next 10 years to become a reality if security infrastructure isn't solved for now. And I think it's pretty typical that innovation precedes security. You're always creating things before things begin to break, before you begin to implement solutions, before it becomes more and more crucial. But we're kind of at that breaking point with over 17 billion exploited to date. We don't have the luxury to not have these components of infrastructure in place, especially with almost every Fortune 500 allocating millions and millions of dollars to crypto Web3 budgets. And though they still might be exploring exactly what that means and exactly what that'll look like, again, like I said, those budgets are increasing year over year. The idea that these organizations will be deploying on chain in the next 5-10 years is very much going to be a reality. And thinking about what does that attack surface look like, where now they have the addition of the Web 2 attack surface plus the Web 3 attack surface, and creating all those edge cases and kind of mapping out the net new attack vectors, which of course I can't begin to go into, even if we had like 20 hours of what every single edge case could be. But if you just think about it, like Web 2 attack surface was this big, yet it's a $300 billion industry of cybersecurity, right? And then Web 3 attack surface is this big. And then now in the future, when you're thinking about all these larger orgs moving on chain, the attack surface becomes astronomical, right? Because everyone has to account for both and solve for both. And I think even majority of the Web3 companies haven't even figured out the Web3 part alone, or the overlap between Web3 and Web2. We recently saw the Bybit exploit. It was a very clear, Web2 tried and true exploit vector. However, sometimes an org, it's just a lot to take on, and the security budgets are not yet as robust as they need to be.
Yeah. You definitely cover some pretty terrifying realities there, to be honest. And I think kind of sometimes that's the importance of these conversations, and really kind of setting the expectations and the realities of these are, this is look at how much money is already being spent and the budgets that are being put towards this. And we're touching the surface. And especially as kind of, everybody's continually evolving, like you say. And you mentioned a few things there, but one thing I think would be interesting to kind of dive into a bit more, because most security teams are still focused on the kind of like the reentrancy attacks and integer overflows. What's the risk of like fighting yesterday's war in crypto security?
Right. Yeah. Great question. So I think, again, we're talking about smart contract security. The idea that you can just think of it as like one static thing you need to check for, which is code security, is also broken. So many of the attack vectors are coming from different edge cases, like the overlap of Web 2 and Web 3, or from just the premise of, okay, these things happened in the past. I trust a manual person to review and recollect everything that historically has happened and then find if my code has that, which also I think is broken. So what I'm referring to is the current process in place for security. So currently, when you want to deploy something on chain, you're like, hey, Connie, I want to deploy something on chain. I'm gonna, create my spec of what that looks like, decide, create a definition. I'm going to have my developers implement that. And then I'm going to go to a third party and ask them to audit it. This is a code audit. So what you're asking them to do is, hey, look through my code. And if there's anything that could break, that could cause an exploit on chain, let me know and we'll make those changes. Now, 90% of exploited contracts are audited. So they undergo that process, 90%. That's a really scary statistic to adhere by and like gain confidence as a CEO, especially when you're taking in such large amounts of liquidity. So when we talk about like, how is that broken, just looking for those things, I think what's broken even more so than like the vulnerability class types is the process in place of just relying on a third party as opposed to a Swiss cheese layered approach, which is something we often talk about in cybersecurity. Is like there's going to be a hole in every piece of the process, but like the more you stack, hopefully it accumulates to a point where like no net holes are at the top. And what does that look like? That looks like proactive security. So implementing security tooling in-house. It looks like an external audit. It looks like attack vector simulation. It looks like on-chain monitoring. Hey, if we know that we have an X% statistic of getting hacked, how do we solve for that? How do we, create a a system where if we get hacked, we get notified and we can mitigate the losses as soon as possible. So there's so many components to what a good security stack should look like. And the reality is majority of protocols and teams operating in the space are not implementing that. And that's why you see these numbers continuously grow. Unfortunately, a lot of our customers come from a place where they didn't do this proactively and they got hacked, and then reactively they're like, okay, moving forward, I want a strong security posture. And like what we hope to see in the future is teams proactively implementing this. And not to say teams aren't, like, of course we have net new customers, but it's not enough. Like the number should be in the 90s, 100s that have a really robust security stack and account for all different tech vectors, all different types, not a 10, 20% outliers that care about security, because caring about security in this ecosystem also means caring about your company, right? Because life or death of your company is contingent on the security of your protocol.
Yeah, but it's always something that's pretty wild in this industry, the fact that people often they wait until something's set on fire. They wait for the problem, and I think it's that mentality of, oh, it won't happen to us, we'll be fine, or
Right.
and then it's kind of like the problem happens, and you're so correct. It's like detrimental, it can be a make or break. I mean, everybody can see the stats that happens when a company has kind of a data breach or anything like that, and how much how much their business can drop, even if it's temporarily. If you're a slightly smaller business, that can be enough to completely break things. And even if you're a massive
Right.
enterprise, it's a pretty significant impact that you'd rather why don't you just pay for the cybersecurity services and systems that, it might feel like it costs a lot up front, but in reality, actually, it's saving a significant amount.
Right.
I mean,
And I think what you're referring to, sorry, is the Web
yeah,
2 attack surface, right, where it's just data that's
yeah,
being compromised. And in this ecosystem, Web 2 ecosystem, regulatory really is on your side. And that's why security budgets have grown so much. And when we're talking about the Web 3 ecosystem, again, it's not data, it's money. And it's decentralized. There's no regulatory coming down and saying, okay, we need to, ensure tools are used, ensure you have a CISO. There's nothing that mandates that except the team and how the team feels about security, thinks about security, the responsibility that lies on their shoulders with that. So like there's also a difference there in terms of what drives security spend.
Okay, if we look at advanced threat actors weaponizing 0 days, are we seeing nation state level attacks on DeFi protocols?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the number one reason here is just because of the stakes. It's so much more lucrative. So Lazarus Group, which is North Korea's APT group, has historically operated in the Web2 ecosystem. And in the last couple of years, we've seen them very, very aggressively move into the Web3 ecosystem. And it's just because they have direct access to liquidity a lot sooner. So for example, they're operating the Web2 ecosystem, and we went through this a little bit before, but they steal data, and then the data they sell to the dark web, and then they get the money, and then they try and move the money and siphon it to different accounts. Web3 ecosystem, it's just not as long hauled of a process. So, hey, we see this protocol has 27 million. We have access to the code. We can see the code. So it's easier. Again, you don't have to undergo like, hey, let's break through this firewall. Let's find the source code. There's a lot less steps, and it's a lot more lucrative. So see the code. They find a hole in the code. Or in the overall attack surface, so maybe it's coming from like the Web 2 side as well. Like we talked about, it's very, very large attack surface when you have that overlapping component of like smart contract security, Web 2 security, OPSEC. There's a lot of pieces there, but they find a hole and they can directly drain the protocol, and the money can be in their account in seconds instead of this long haul process of selling the data. Then, so when it's more lucrative, of course, they're going after it. So there are even a lot of claims that North Korea is funding their nuclear program via money from Web3 exploits. Yeah.
I mean, again, that makes it sound pretty terrifying, to be honest. And I think you're kind of just setting the expectation there that it doesn't take much. It's almost the more advanced the technology is getting on almost like our side of things, almost the easier the access is that we're creating for. And I suppose it goes back to that larger attack surface. Obviously, it's almost like creating more vulnerability.
And I think just hammering back on something I said previously, innovation always precedes security. So even if we're thinking about like AI, cyber attacks on AI, there's a lot of companies spinning up there. And again, now I'm referring to like Web2 ecosystem traditional, but because AI is so net new,
Yeah.
there are new ways to break it because people have historically only focused on innovating on it and making it work, that they haven't focused on like how can we protect it. And again, like a lot of companies are spinning up now to do that. So by the same token, in the DeFi and the Web3 ecosystem, people have so aggressively focused on like how can we innovate this, how can we globalize economic freedom. There's so many things that this ecosystem unlocks for individuals, that focusing on the net value add has been much more important to the overall ecosystem before security, but now it's really catching up with us. Like with every 2 weeks, a minimum of 5 million drained. It's really staggering numbers, and we can't scale without true security infrastructure in place.
Yeah, I like the way that you break that down, because I don't know why I always call it the cat and mouse chase. And like you were constantly in this circle of like technology advances, and then we're trying to catch up with from the security perspective. Because you're 100% right. If you're innovating, you're not always thinking of like, it's definitely the challenge, but you don't want it to slow you down as well. I suppose there's also the race of you need to be the first to do it, and you need to do it kind of best. And I suppose with that, the security practice isn't always the first thing on the mind. And yeah, it's just it's always going to be that way around, though, isn't it? I don't think it matters too much where it goes. Well, I mean, to circle back a little bit then, because you did actually mention this a little bit earlier, but if we're looking at like traditional audits aren't necessarily enough anymore. I mean, for anybody that's kind of listening and maybe thinking, oh, okay, like this is, you've really opened my eyes here. What should a protocol's security strategy look like in 2025?
Yeah. So I think it's just a layered approach. Like I mentioned earlier, it's not one checklist static item of like, hey, I had an external provider look at my code. They gave me suggestions. I implemented those suggestions and now I'm good. It's a Swiss cheese layered approach. So it's taking that ownership that like, and I think what happens here is people go to an external partner and they think they can offset their risk. And like, because this person reviewed my code, they're responsible, but the reality is you as CEO of your protocol are responsible, you as CTO of your protocol, and when it goes under, it's all on you. So even though it feels like you've offset that risk, it's still 100% internally owned, and everything that happens is 100% your responsibility. So when I talk about kind of this layered approach, it's how you take ownership and control and autonomy of the security stack, and how you can create, you can never 100% guarantee anything, but how can you create proof points that like I have done XYZ thing to ensure and to, more than other people have done, that stack me up against the odds. And that's all security is, like, how can I stack against the odds? Someone once said to me, it's like a wall, and of course it has cracks, but you're constantly just trying to like muck in, like just trying to make sure water doesn't get through. And some cracks you won't be able to see, and some cracks are really small, but some cracks are big. But like if you can see the hole, which is like very clear and glaring holes, as if like you're just using an external provider and you don't have proactive security and reactive security, like those are huge glaring holes. And if you leave those holes, like it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when you're going to get exploited. Now, when you begin patching those holes and saying like, I have processes here, I'm also using an external provider, the chances of something bad happening to you go down drastically. And that's all you can do right now. Like you can never get 100% guarantee, and the ecosystem just isn't there yet. But when you're acting negligently and just implementing one static security check within your process, that's when, again, like I said, it's a matter of if, when, not if, not when.
Yeah, I feel like it's yeah.
Not if,
Well, what if?
Yeah.
Know what you and I think that's the thing. It's almost like that you can't bury your head in the sand as much as you want to in these situations. And I think sometimes it comes down to, it's like the cost and the effort and this and that and all these different things that I think sometimes can be hard to get budgets and sign-offs on. But the reality is, it's
100%. I think it's the most broken piece of the ecosystem. So like so many of these protocols are net new builders in the ecosystem. Me, any other founder knows how difficult it is to fundraise, how difficult it is to convince people to give you their money. And then once you get that money, let's say you get 25K, let's say you get 50K, let's say you get $1 million. having to divvy out majority of that budget to security just to ensure like not only can I build it whatever, but like even if I hit all these metrics, I need to divvy that out to security, otherwise it'll go down in flames in a matter of minutes. And like we see that so frequently happening to these early stage teams where they're just hitting product velocity, product market fit. You know, they're starting to accumulate 5 million in total value lock, 10 million, 20 million, and like, you know, they're gearing up for a raise, they're gearing up to like move forward, they're so excited, all their hard work's starting to pay off. And because they didn't have the resources for a security budget, they get exploited, their entire protocol's drained, and they're dead. And like it's not even just them. Like, of course you feel bad for the founders putting their hard work and the team, blah blah blah, yes, but it's also the individuals who believed in those projects and invested their own capital and created that total volume locked in value within the protocol, and then to have it just drained in a matter of seconds is really scary.
Yeah. I actually think something that we're starting to see a little bit is a lot of kind of the venture capitals that are now looking to help support with the series funding after a certain stage, they're starting to ask questions around some of these security protocols. And I think that awareness piece is definitely starting to come into play, but it's making sure that they're asking the questions in the right places. I think a lot of people are still focused on the data-centric side. And as you've highlighted here, actually some of your biggest vulnerabilities are actually probably falling into a different category that you're maybe not even looking at, which I suppose is, again, even, you know, it just shows that developmental piece. But as you say, it's that innovation is kind of leading the way at this point. I mean, what kind of, you know, there's probably multiple people that have been kind of listening into this and thinking, right, okay, well, this resonates a little bit, or maybe that, you know, the heart rate might have increased, thinking this is actually really scary to know kind of that we could have these vulnerabilities without even kind of recognizing that it could have been a problem. What's your advice here? You know, how can people reach out to you? What should their next steps be? What would you say, right? Other than dropping me a note when you come off this podcast, this is what you really need to do.
Yeah, so I'd say if you're a listener and you're deploying anything on chain, what you really need to do is, before deploying anything, is create a strategy. So, and that strategy cannot just be one external provider giving me recommendations. So thinking about a proactive strategy that your team owns internally and a reactive strategy. In the event that I get hacked, what happens? So am I implementing on-chain monitoring? Am I implementing, you know, different chaos engineering? And then proactively, like, what kind of tooling do I have in place to automate vulnerability classification, vulnerability findings ahead of going to a third-party provider? So really thinking about like that entire holistic process of, and also of course the OPSEC piece before deploying anything. So just remembering that like the life or death of your company can hinge on the security practices in this ecosystem, and especially if you're coming from the Web2 ecosystem where core security matters, but it's just not as pivotal, meaning like in the event that you have a breach, your company is not going under necessarily. It is 100% going under in this ecosystem if you don't have best practices in place. So just thinking about that, like to the same degree of importance as like getting things to launch, as shipping new features, as getting customers, is my security good? Have I thought about it? Is it expansive? So bringing those thoughts top of mind is critical and crucial to succeeding here.
Yeah, no, really, really good advice. And I know I kind of embedded that a little bit in the question, but if people want to reach out to you, if they want to learn more, if they want to hear a bit more about what you're doing, what's the best way that they can kind of take that step?
Yeah, so we have a couple newsletters, so always recommend subscribing to those directly on our website, www.olympix.ai. And then if you want to get in touch with me, I'm on LinkedIn. The spelling of my name should be linked here. Channi Greenwall, which you're not going to guess how to spell based on me saying it, so it should be this podcast episode. Shoot me a note on LinkedIn.
Awesome. No, that's great.
We're always hiring, so.
And that's always the exciting bit. Well, honestly, thank you so much, Nyan. It's your experience, your knowledge is absolutely undeniable here. I think you've really kind of brought to attention something that is so critical in the space, but not necessarily always the top priority or what's considered when people are looking at security. So to our listeners, as always, don't forget to subscribe. Make sure to share this episode with your security peers. Get connected with us on LinkedIn, and make sure, like I say, if something's resonated with you today, to reach out to Hanai and the team at Olympix. And that's it for today, though. So thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time for more conversations shaping cyber.